I bought my son a Tesla Model S for his 35th birthday. During dinner, he raised his glass and said, "Here's to the foolish mother trying to buy love with money." Everyone burst out laughing. I just stood up, smiled, and walked away without saying a word. The next morning, his driveway was empty, and my phone was blowing up with 88 missed calls. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. I gripped the steering wheel and drew in a long breath, the scent of new plastic filling the cabin of the Tesla Model S metallic silver. Ethan once said back in summer, "Mom, that color looks like light running." I'd held on to that sentence through the signing of the contract, through transferring the savings I'd scraped together over 2 years. Simple dinners, canceled vacations, gifts I told myself could wait. My name is Laura Bennett, 52. I work in finance, nothing flashy, a widow with one remaining family member, my son. All the way to his house, I kept murmuring one line to myself, "Happy birthday, Ethan." The dealership had delivered the car a week earlier. The manager pushed open the glass door and led me to the car under the cover. The tarp came off. He asked, "You sure about this color?" I just nodded. Every choice I'd made had its reason. Dark interior so Ethan wouldn't worry about stains, driver, assist because he worked late, a wall charger so he wouldn't have to linger around public stations. That night, I sat in the driver's seat, turned on the screen, and listened to the soft startup sound like a fingertip brushing over glass. I thought about my son's face, not the moment of surprise for social media, but a warm look, long enough for me to see myself reflected in it. Ethan's house sat in a quiet neighborhood on the north side of the city. Inside, laughter spilled through the door crack. I rang the bell. Vanessa, Ethan's girlfriend, opened it, first soft perfume, a smile perfectly placed. "Hi, Mrs. Bennett," Vanessa said, her hand lightly brushing my arm. "Everyone's waiting." I nodded, slipped the key into my coat pocket, and followed her to the kitchen. The party was small. Ethan's friends, a few co-workers, young neighbors from next door. The cake sat on the table, candles unlit. Ethan saw me, came over, and gave a half-hearted hug. "Mom's here," he said. "I'm here," I answered. I handed him a small gift box, a metal keychain engraved with the first 3 letters of his name. "Open it outside," I whispered. "It's nothing big." Ethan raised an eyebrow, opened the lid. His eyes skimmed over it, then dropped to the table. "Nice," he said flatly. Vanessa chimed in. "Looks cool." I smiled, swallowing the urge to take them both outside and point to the car waiting under the tree's shadow. I kept my plan. After dinner, step outside, hand him the keys, watch him take it for a spin. Dinner passed quickly. Someone talked about a downtown project, someone complained about housing prices, someone else asked about promotion tracks. I sat at the far end, listening to the sound of cutlery on porcelain, my smile balanced just right. I watched how Ethan leaned in when Vanessa spoke, how he hid a yawn behind his wine glass, 35 now broad-shouldered, a faint work line on his forehead. I reminded myself, after dinner, don't make a scene. When the cake came out, the lights dimmed. Someone started the birthday song, applause rising. Vanessa lit the candles, pulled Ethan up. I found myself standing too, maybe for the photo. Ethan took a glass of wine, raised it to eye level. He swirled it once, looked around the room, then straight at me, his smile folded like a crease in fabric. "Here's to the foolish mother trying to buy love with money." The room burst into laughter. A man in the corner even clapped twice. Vanessa laughed the loudest, dabbing her eyes with a napkin as if she were choking. I heard glasses clink, someone mumbling, "Spot on." Another voice saying, "Typical American mom," and then layers of laughter stacking over one another. I froze. Not because of the word foolish, but because of how easily it slipped from Ethan's mouth like habit. I watched the candle flames sway. The music drifted away, as if from another room. I placed my hand on the back of my chair, steadying myself. My face flushed. My neck went cold. For about 5 seconds, my mind went blank. No rebuttal, no defense. I heard my own voice, calm as if greeting a neighbor. "Happy birthday, son." I smiled. No trembling, no strain. Just one quiet fold to hold everything else in place. No one noticed I had spoken. Vanessa was already leaning down to blow the candles with Ethan. Thin smoke rose, people chanting, "Make a wish, make a wish." I pushed the chair in, grabbed my purse, and slipped behind them. Vanessa glanced up briefly, no question in her eyes. Ethan turned to cut the cake, the knife tapping against the plate. I walked down the hall, unlocked the door. No one called after me. The door closed behind me. The air on the porch was cold. Rain. I stood under the awning for a few seconds, watching my reflection blur in the dark window of the Tesla. I stepped down, my shoes splashing in a puddle. The porch light split in two sharp slivers across the wet ground. I pressed the key fob. The car woke up, a streak of light sliding across the dashboard just like Ethan had once said. No one knew about the gift waiting only a few yards away. No one needed to. I got in, buckled my seatbelt. The rain drummed faster. Through the mirror I could see the living room window fogged, shapes moving, the knife rising and falling over the cake. I touched the screen, turned the music off, letting the rain take over. The key, the one I'd meant to give with both hands, lay in my coat pocket. I took it out, placed it in the cup holder, looked at it for a second, then pushed it deeper down. I started the car. The electric hum lifted it just a millimeter off the ground, in my imagination. If last night was a knife, then this morning I asked myself, when did my son learn to find joy in my pain? I pulled a small wooden box labeled Ethan from the bottom of the closet. Inside were a few papers, a few small things light enough to forget, heavy enough to remember. The first sheet was an old elementary school report card. In the corner, my handwriting in pencil. "You just have to try your best at school. Mom will take care of the rest." My phone lit up. "Are you planning to apologize to me, Ethan?" I didn't reply. I opened the hospital envelope from when my husband died, tucked together with my overtime request from the bank and the pay slips from late-night shifts at the coffee shop. I had promised myself my child would never go without what he needed, and I kept that promise. Tuition, summer camps, robotics classes, every bit of it handled by me. There was a college acceptance letter from California, its edges yellowed. But after that, the messages began to fade, both in length and number. They grew shorter. "I'm busy." I learned not to ask follow-ups. I convinced myself he was just overwhelmed. That was my first mistake, confusing silent endurance for healthy boundaries. A note I'd written a few years back. What he said recently, "Mom, you're so old-fashioned." It was tucked between two rejections. The walk by the lake. The concert tickets. I switched to sending things that didn't require seeing me. A warm coat, a ticket to a science exhibit. The ticket remained untorn. The coat hung unworn. I taught him how to set goals for life, but I forgot to teach him to look back and to be grateful to the one standing behind him. There was a letter I once wrote to Ethan but never sent. "You may not need me to show up, but I'm not your wallet." I read it again, folded it. Wished I'd sent it sooner. I turned to the last monthly ledger before his 35th birthday. Tesla savings completed. 2 years of scraping by. I chose the silver color because he'd once said it looked like light running. I wasn't buying love. I was trying to build a bridge, a way for us to be closer. But I forgot to ask whether the person on the other side wanted to cross. The phone buzzed again. "You embarrassed me." I turned off notifications completely. No one gets to press the button on my forehead anymore. I opened my banking app, checked his secondary card, and scheduled its cancellation as soon as I was done. No hesitation. An old receipt surfaced, books I'd bought him in high school. Programming, mechanics, habits. I'd added gratitude to the cart, too imaginary, of course. But imagination doesn't teach anyone to say thank you. I closed the receipt, opened a new note, this one for the present. Not the past. To do. Cancel secondary card. Reminder. Silence is for listening to yourself, not for enduring others. Commitment. If pushed to explain, take one step back. The final message appeared. "Are you coming over to talk tonight?" I typed one line short, clear, without argument. "No. When you're ready to tell the truth, I'll listen." Sent. Nothing more, nothing less. I looked at the dark phone screen reflecting my face. I thought about that glass from last night. It hadn't just held wine, it held my son's definition of me. And when he raised it, I didn't just hear glass clinking, I heard 20 years of motherhood shatter. I haven't found a switch to turn off that feeling yet. But I just found my own switch. Boundaries on. 6 a.m. I sat up, eyelids heavy as lead. On the kitchen table, the car's title papers lay perfectly flat, the dealership's embossed seal glinting in the corner. I pulled out the first page. Under owner, my name was still there. The transfer hadn't been made. A small, legal blank space, just enough for a clean decision. I dialed the Tesla dealership manager. The phone rang twice. He answered, voice still rough from sleep. I'm the one who picked up the silver Model S last week, I said, keeping my tone even. Something happened last night. I'd like to return the car. He paused for half a beat, then asked exactly what needed asking: condition, mileage, accessories intact. I answered succinctly. If the car's undamaged, he said, we can take it back for nearly full value, mark it as a short-term display model. Can you bring it in today? I'll bring it in this morning. All right, call me when you get to the lot. I hung up, put on my coat, slipped the papers into my pocket. Everything moved like a bank transaction, small steps, in order, without commentary. I opened the door. Damp air hit my face. I sat in the driver's seat, turned on the seat warmer one notch, placed my hands at 10 and 2. The drive wasn't long, but it felt like drawing a straight line, firm, no tremor. When I reached Ethan's house, I stopped at the curb. The red bow still clung to the hood like a cruel joke from the night before, soaked through, ribbons dripping down over the license plate. The downstairs curtains were drawn. The house was silent, no footsteps. I opened the car door. Cold air slid down my neck. I unfastened the bow, folded it into a heavy, wet clump, and stuffed it into the small trash bag hanging by the door panel. There was no reason to leave any trace. At the dealership, the manager, dark coat, unshaven chin, walked a slow circle around the car, checking for scratches, noting mileage. He nodded, handed me a confirmation slip. We'll process the refund today, he said. Do you need anything else? I need an invoice that states short-term display as the reason. That's all. He read my name, said thank you, the way professionals do. I signed. The whole thing took 15 minutes. When I left the lot, I didn't look back. Not to prove strength, just because there was no need. Back home, I plugged in my phone. The screen lit up with a chain of notifications as long as a metal link. 88 missed calls. Ethan's name repeating, with Vanessa's in between, and a few distant relatives I barely spoke to. The texts poured in like water. What is this, Mom? So childish. He's humiliated because of you. What were you thinking? Why would you do that to your own son? One from Vanessa. We don't need the drama. One from my aunt in Portland. Whatever happened, please text back. No one asked if I was all right. I set the phone down and let it keep vibrating against the wooden table. I slipped on a light jacket and stepped outside. The morning lake was flat as frosted glass, the path along the water glistening. I walked slowly, listening to my footsteps instead of the phone's ringing. The first year after my husband's accident, I used to walk this path every night after cafe shifts to remind my heart to beat to something other than bills and fear. Today, that rhythm returned on its own. A few hundred steps later, I sat on a wooden bench, back straight, eyes level. In my head, I heard my husband's voice steady, the way it was when he sorted through tax papers. Sometimes silence is the only thing that makes people listen. He used to say it to stop me from arguing with rude customers. Turns out it fits a lot more now: accusatory texts, a wrongly raised glass, a noisy party with no one truly listening. I went home as the mist began to lift. The phone was still glowing, tireless. I opened each missed call, then closed it without listening to the voicemails. In the living room, 3 framed photos hung on the wall. Our wedding, Ethan's high school graduation, and a picture taken in the park during fall foliage. I lifted the graduation frame. Vanessa stood next to Ethan, her arm resting lightly on his shoulder. I didn't resent her. She was simply standing where life had opened a space for her. I wiped the thin dust off the wooden edge, opened the drawer beneath the shelf, placed the frame inside, and closed it. Not thrown away, just set aside, out of sight. I didn't reply to the messages. Didn't explain. Not as a tactic, not as punishment. just because I'd chosen to stand somewhere else where my words wouldn't dissolve into someone else's laughter. I washed the cup, set it upside down on the rack, wiped the table, opened the window to let the steam drift out. In the kitchen, the clock struck 7:30. I had taken back the car, but really, what I reclaimed was myself. 3 days later, everything lit up again like a stage that hadn't been cleared after the show. On my phone screen, Ethan's post appeared. A photo of the empty parking spot in front of his house, the pavement still wet with rain. The caption read, "Still waiting for the Tesla to come back. Anyone seen her?" Below it, the laughing emojis rolled across the comments. "Your mom's got such a wild personality," one account wrote. "Classic Hollywood drama," another added. Someone joked even worse. "You should have put an AirTag on your mom." I read every line, watching someone use my name as a prop in their performance. I didn't comment. I opened settings and hit block. The list grew longer, but messages still slipped through another app, screenshots of the post, a few "Are you okay?" and some forwarded accusations. My screen buzzed nonstop, like a low-battery fire alarm that refused to die. I took a deep breath and turned off notifications. That afternoon, I called Dana. She was a friend of my late husband's, now a privacy lawyer. Her voice was crisp, efficient, never wasting a word. "Come by my office this afternoon," she said. "Bring everything you can save." Dana's office was on the 12th floor of a building near downtown Seattle. The waiting room overlooked the bay, the water a soft gray. She greeted me with the measured look of someone who's known you for years but keeps boundaries clean. She set a glass of water in front of me and opened her laptop. "Start from the beginning," she said. I told her. The gift, the dinner, the toast, the rain-soaked bow, the messages. I handed her my phone. She plugged in a cable, extracted screenshots, messages, links. "All right," she said after a few minutes. "First thing, you don't respond publicly. No arguing, no justifying. Any explanation now just fuels the fire." I nodded. "Second," she continued, "you collect evidence. What you did this morning was right. Third, you protect your finances immediately. Does Ethan still have access to any payment method?" "He used to," I said. "A secondary card, back when he was in school. Years ago." "Assume he still does. Cancel it. Change your bank passwords. Turn on two-factor authentication. Check if he's still listed as an authorized user anywhere. If so, remove him. I'll send you a checklist. Let me know when you've completed it." I watched her jaw tighten slightly each time she finished a sentence. "No, I'm sorry for you. No pat on the shoulder. Just tasks." It was strangely comforting. Outside, I waited under the awning for the rain to ease. My phone lit up again, a relative. "It's all over social media now. I don't believe it, but you should say something." I typed "later," then erased it. Left it blank. Back home, I opened my laptop. Dana's list was clear, step by step. I canceled the secondary card through the bank portal and email confirmation followed. I changed passwords, added two-factor authentication, unlinked old devices, checked every connected account. I called the bank to confirm the list of authorized users. The representative's voice was calm, walking me through timestamps and statuses. I crossed off each item one by one, like striking arrows pointed at my home. A text popped up. "Ethan just went live, says it was all a joke and you overreacted." I pressed and held, tapped delete, never opened it. I wasn't there anymore. I was in the domain of numbers and settings where calm was measured by completing a form. That afternoon, I stopped by the bank in person. I asked for a printed statement of the past year's transactions tied to that secondary card. The clerk handed me a neat stack of papers. Skimming through, I saw small purchases from when he was still in school. Books, food, a few gas fill-ups. I closed the file, clipped it together, and slipped it into my bag. Some things, it seems, can only be faced years later. By evening, the rain had thinned. I made a simple bowl of soup, ate slowly, listening to the changing rhythm of drops on the roof. My phone lit up again this time, a message from Dana. He just tried to use the card at a grocery store. Declined. One plain sentence like a switch being flipped. I set the spoon down. My heart didn't race. Just a quiet stretch of stillness. long enough for me to realize my body had finally unclenched. I pictured my son at the checkout counter, handing over the card, hearing the machine beep error. I didn't feel pleasure at the thought, only clarity. A boundary redrawn, one clean line, two sides clear, and anyone who crosses it will hear the sound of paper tearing. In the living room, I turned off the TV, drew the curtains, and sat by the window. Ethan's post was still up, surely flooded with new comments by now. I didn't check. Some rooms, even if their doors are open, no longer need entering. I opened my notebook and wrote a few lines. No arguments, no justifications. Keep evidence. Protect finances. At the bottom, I underlined one sentence. Never apologize for protecting yourself. Late at night, I lay down, but couldn't sleep. The phone was silent. I didn't hope for it to buzz, and I wasn't afraid it never would again. I closed my eyes, listening to the rain rolling off the roof, no longer counting drops like someone waiting for a message. Turns out, reclaiming control doesn't need an explosion. Just a single button and the courage not to apologize for protecting yourself. In the morning, just as the coffee maker released its first drip, my phone buzzed. A message from an old colleague at the bank who'd moved out of state years ago. Ethan reached out to me. He said, "You're not doing well. Is that true?" I typed, "I'm fine." Then paused, deleted it. Replaced it with, "Thank you for checking in. I'll handle it myself." After sending it, I opened my laptop and went to social media. Ethan's post sat at the top of my feed, a plain white wall with black text. "When a loved one loses control, don't abandon them." At the bottom, "My mom is going through a tough time. Anyone who's been there, please share advice." Hundreds of comments. "Poor thing. Stay strong. Family above all." No one knew how the story began. No one asked me. I scrolled further. Ethan had added a comment. "After Dad's death, Mom never really recovered. Everything lately has just been the last straw." He wrote in soft tones, wrapping lies in gentle phrasing like a blanket laid over something ugly to make it look warm. Every word was wrong. I didn't hit report. I took screenshots, each one, each timestamp, and saved them. Then came the emails. A friend from college, now a high school teacher, forwarded me a chain. Ethan had written to several people in my contact list, telling them I was emotionally unstable after my husband's death, lost, isolating herself. Attached was an old photo, the two of us at his college graduation in California. I was wearing a blue coat. He was in his black gown, grinning wide. The caption, "Before everything changed." I zoomed in. My hand was resting lightly on his elbow, so light it almost wasn't there. I remembered that day. I'd asked, "Where should we go to celebrate?" He said, "My friend's already booked a place." I said, "Then I'll pick you up after." That night, I ate noodles at home and called it my own way of celebrating. All true. But now the photo was being used as a moral sticker. I didn't reply to the emails. I created a new folder on my computer, named it with the date, and dragged every screenshot and email into it. Then I sent the folder link to Dana, with a single note, "I need you." Dana called almost immediately. "I've seen enough," she said. "I'll draft a legal warning. The goal: demand he stop defamation, cease contacting your acquaintances, and remove all posted content. If he continues, we'll sue for libel. Do you think he'll stop?" I asked. "We don't guess," she said. "We do our part." That afternoon, Dana sent the draft. The language was direct, professional, just facts and evidence, no threats, no emotion. I read it from start to finish, my throat dry. I signed electronically. The letter was sent within the hour. Receipt confirmed. The next day, Ethan posted again. A gray background, bold letters. "This generation is heartless. My mother is suing her own son over a misunderstanding." Below, a long paragraph about work pressure, efforts to reconcile, legal aggression. The comments flared. Some preached about filial duty. Others said, "Don't judge without knowing the truth." Occasionally, a quiet account slipped in. Maybe silence really is golden. Likes piled up, reaction emojis swept across the screen like headlights cutting through fog. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the posts spread by numbers. But the anger was gone. Only exhaustion remained, exhaustion from thinking about my son's choices, exhaustion from realizing how kindness can spoil into entitlement. Dana texted, "He's received the letter." His response was vague, no admission, no denial, "It's fine. We stay steady." I typed back, "Thank you." She asked, "Do you have someone to talk to?" I hesitated, then replied, "Not yet." Dana sent me a list of therapists around Seattle. Next to one name, a middle-aged woman she'd written, "She's good." I clicked call, made an appointment. The office was on the second floor of a red brick building near a park. Fabric chairs, no heavy scent, windows slightly open. The woman greeted me with eyes that didn't pry, just waited for me to set my story down. "I'm a mother," I began. "And I'm tired." She nodded, silent. "I taught my son to be strong, focused, never let emotions get in the way of goals. I forgot to teach him to look back to see who's standing behind him." "What do you want to happen now?" she asked. "I want quiet again. I want to stop reacting every time my phone rings." In later sessions, we moved slowly, like opening drawers, taking things out, examining them, putting them back. I realized I still counted messages in my head even with the phone off. She suggested something simple. Every time your hand reaches for the phone, ask yourself, who am I doing this for? If the answer isn't for me, put it down. I tried. At first it was hard. Then it became habit. I told her about the angry messages I never opened, about the old photo turned into a weapon, about the phrase, "Mom's not okay," plastered across my face like a warning label. She didn't use complex jargon. She just said, "Some people manipulate through pity. When you step out of the role of explainer, they get louder. That's not your fault." I sat still, hearing that sentence drop like a heavy object onto wooden floors, one sound, then quiet. One afternoon after therapy, I stopped by a small park, gray sky, wet leaves. A few people walking dogs, eyes down, passing without glances. I stood beneath a tree and opened my phone. There were still new posts, new arguments, strangers defending a story they didn't know. I started to type something, then turned off the screen. Everything went dark, condensed into a small piece of glass resting quietly in my hand. I slipped it into my pocket. That night, I texted Dana. "I saw the therapist." She replied, "Good. How do you feel?" "I will be okay." "Excellent. We'll keep the records. If needed, the next step is filing a lawsuit." "I know. I don't need to defeat my son. I just need to stop letting him control my emotions. I don't have to respond to prove I'm good, and I don't have to play the villain just because someone shouts louder. My job now is to close the rooms I no longer want to live in and open windows where I can breathe." Before bed, I stood on the balcony, night air brushing through my sleeves. The city wasn't quiet, but my mind was. I thought about tomorrow, my to-do list, a simple breakfast. The phone buzzed once, then stopped. I let it be. As I left the therapist's office that day, I looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "If silence is a weapon, then today I've learned how to use it." And I decided to move somewhere else quiet, far from all the noise, and start over. On my last night in the Seattle apartment, I stood in the empty living room, my hand resting on the light switch as if checking the house's heartbeat. The white walls showed faint square outlines where the picture frames used to hang. Rain hit the window ledge steady and cold. I took one final walk around, no extra dishes in the kitchen, hangers bare in the closet, drawers empty. The folder for the house sale sat neatly in my bag, papers signed, handover date stamped. I pulled the curtains closed, turned off the lights. The only sound left was the rain tapping like the end of a song. At 6 a.m., I left Seattle. The West Coast Highway stretched ahead like a long straight line, sharp turns in between. I didn't play music, just listened to the tires swallow miles and to the rhythm of my own breathing. At rest stops, people lined up for coffee, chatting about baseball and gas prices. I paid, nodded, and kept driving, never looking in the rearview mirror longer than a blink. When the sign for Santa Barbara appeared, the sunlight had changed tone, warmer, drier. I stopped in front of a 3-story red-roofed building, a small rental office. The manager handed me a key and a checklist. "Welcome," he said. "Thank you," I replied, brief and simple. The apartment was sparsely furnished. A wooden frame bed, an empty bookshelf, a desk near an outlet, a window overlooking the parking lot, and a slice of sky. I opened the window, the air was salty, unlike Seattle's damp rain smell. I rolled my suitcase into the kitchen, unpacked a few cups, a small pot, a non-stick pan, enough for simple dinners. From a box, I pulled out a stack of thin books and placed them on the shelf, practical guides on finance, habits, a few short novels. The heavier memories I'd left behind: an old blanket with a trace of a man's cologne, the family photo frame that once hung in the living room, a box of unused concert tickets. I stood in the middle of the room and took a deep breath. It felt like stepping into a freshly cleaned clinic, white, quiet, ready for use. By noon, I'd set up my workspace: laptop, second monitor, headset, notebook. I tested the connection, joined a conference line to check the echo, synced the calendar to the new time zone. I messaged my team. "Still here, just a different area code." They replied with polite, non-intrusive well wishes. I filled my weekly schedule: 3 morning meetings, afternoon file reviews, evening prep for a personal finance class. I'd agreed to teach a trial session at a local community center by the beach. Everything fit neatly, like cells in a spreadsheet, columns and rows aligned. In the afternoon, I walked to the beach. There's no need to describe the ocean here. People treat it like an amenity, jogging past it, throwing frisbees, walking dogs. I moved slowly, counting steps, feeling my breath settle. With each stride, the tightness in my chest eased a little. I chose a wooden bench facing the path, sat down, and wrote 3 lines in my notebook, a habit I wanted to form. But noise still finds its way in. That evening, the building manager knocked on my door, handing me a package with no return name. The mail carrier had left it at the office. I brought it to the kitchen, sliced through the tape with a knife. Inside was a picture frame wrapped in bubble wrap. I unrolled it: Ethan's graduation photo from California. We stood side by side, my head tilted slightly, his eyes toward the camera, smile half finished. On the back, a handwritten note: "You'll always be my mother, whether you want to or not." The handwriting was familiar. I placed the photo on the table and sat across from it. I took a sip of water, not rushing to rewrap it. I let my eyes rest on the picture, not looking for faults or reasons, just acknowledging that it existed. The phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Did you get it yet?" No greeting. No name. Just one short, cold line. I set the phone down, washed my hands, dried them, and only then replied, "Don't send anything else." No exclamation mark. No explanation. Message sent, no typing bubbles in return. In the kitchen, the wind howled through the window crack. A sudden gust hit the glass hard, like someone pushing from outside. I stood, grabbed an old newspaper, wrapped the photo tightly, one layer, then another. I opened the cabinet, pulled out a black trash bag, placed the bundle inside, pressed it to the bottom, tied the handles, made a knot. I carried it down the hall and dropped it into the shared trash bin at the end of the corridor. When the lid slammed shut, the smell of plastic and paper mixed a clean break. Back inside, I washed my hands again, splashed water on my face, changed clothes. There was no ritual of cleansing, just the quiet act of letting the apartment know it wouldn't be a storage room for forced memories. That night, I sat at my desk and reviewed my schedule: an early risk meeting, a short call with legal, 2 hours of file review, then a visit to the community center to meet the class coordinator. The phone lit up with another message from the same number. "Can you call me?" I turned the phone face down. I didn't call. I listened to the air conditioner hum and click off, its rhythm steady as a lullaby. In my head, the old phrases still surfaced. Family comes first. Don't make it a big deal. We just misunderstood each other. I let them pass like cars on a highway, loud, fleeting, gone. In the dark, I knew I had moved not just by address, but by the way I now lived. I wanted closure, peace. But life rarely grants silence easily. The tree may wish for stillness, yet the wind never stops. After several weeks of stillness like water that hadn't rippled once, my phone suddenly lit up while I was folding clothes at my desk. Ethan's name flashed to the top of the screen, followed by a string of messages pouring in like a burst of rain. "I'm exhausted lately. Work's a mess, layoffs, everything's falling on me. Rent's gone up, and my credit card interest is killing me. Can you call me tonight? We should talk like adults." I set the shirt down, wiped my hands along the edge of the desk, and read each line, slowly, punctuation included. The pattern was familiar, so ingrained it didn't even need thought. Start with pity pieces like exhausted, pressure, rising costs. Then the deflection, everything's falling on me. And I waited for the final drop, the request. It came right on time. If you could help me out financially for a little while, I'll get things together. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My fingers hadn't typed yet, but they already remembered the old reflex, the one that turned me into the fixer of every leak. I turned the phone face down and poured myself a glass of water. The coolness washed the bitterness from my mouth, but my throat still felt taut, like a string pulled too tight. My email chimed. A former coworker from Seattle had sent a link. Subject line, "Is this Ethan?" I opened it. A GoFundMe page appeared. The banner photo showing Ethan grinning brightly at his birthday dinner the moment right before the candles went out. Campaign title, Healing from Family Trauma. The description was vague. When family turns away, sometimes you need your community. My name wasn't mentioned, but every word pointed straight at me. The donation total sat still, just a few small contributions. In the corner, a faint, last updated timestamp. I scrolled slowly to the bottom. Creator, Ethan. A closing note. Being abandoned by your own mother is a wound hard to put into words. I took screenshots, saved them in the old folder on my laptop, named by date. A habit Dana had taught me. Let the data speak for you. But I didn't send it to her yet. I wanted to see what I would do when there were no other adults to call in. Ethan's messages kept trickling in. I don't want to pressure you. It's just temporary. Once things stabilize, I'll pay you back. I reopened the thread, read from the top. When I reached Talk Like Adults, I stopped typing halfway. I wrote, Adults start with the truth, then deleted it. Typed again. If we talk, it has to be the truth, not a performance. Sent. No emojis, no extra lines to soften the blow. The typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Then came his reply. I just want to make things right. Don't overreact. The familiar maneuver casting me again as the one who's too much. I didn't answer. I opened my settings and muted the conversation. Silence fell instantly, like a door clicking shut. That afternoon, the coordinator from the community center texted to confirm my first class. I said yes, noted down a few practical topics, budgeting, and how to say no to temporary loans from relatives that never have a due date. As I practiced aloud, my voice came out steady like a line drawn cleanly across a whiteboard. That lesson wasn't just for the students. I didn't turn on the TV that night. I took out my notebook and wrote 3 lines, as I did every evening since moving here. What I did, looked at the GoFundMe page, didn't comment. What I felt. Sad for the face in the photo. What I want to let go of. The habit of rescuing others before they face their own responsibility. I closed the notebook, placed the pen neatly beside it. The fridge motor hummed, then went still. My phone buzzed softly this time, not from Ethan. It was the friend who had sent the link that morning. Are you going to do anything about it? I typed, no. Then added, thank you for sending it. No explanation. I didn't need anyone to label my silence as weakness or wisdom. It was simply a choice. An hour later, another message from Ethan. Don't you feel guilty? People think I'm some kind of victim. I read it and saw the shift he'd moved from the abandoned son to the misjudged son. Different role, same stage. Still performing for an audience. I put the phone down, went to the sink, and washed a plate still dotted with crumbs. Warm water ran over my hands, cooling my head. Back at the desk, I picked up my phone again. I opened every unread message, one by one, clearing the dark corners. Then I typed my final line for the day and sent it, my hands steady. If we talk, it has to be the truth, not a performance. I muted the thread again, this time without hesitation. The phone lay face up, the black screen reflecting my face just enough for me to see a woman learning not to hide behind rescue plans. I turned off the light. The room folded into clean darkness. I sat still, listening to the clock each tick like a stitch closing a seam. No skipped beats. Behind my eyes, I saw a ceramic vase crack circling its body like a map. It had been glued, painted, patched countless times. I exhaled, slow and even. I will not glue a broken vase just to pretend it's whole. I flew into Los Angeles in the afternoon, the plane descending over a stretch of golden lights lined up like ruler marks. The professional conference was being held downtown, with the hotel right next door, its lobby wide and cold, air conditioning blowing sharply through dark green potted plants. I checked in, hung up my jacket, placed my files in my briefcase, and took the elevator down to buy a bottle of water. When the doors opened, I stepped out and met a familiar gaze. Ethan was leaning against a column, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes uncertain. His glance flicked to the conference badge on my chest, then back up. A pause. "This has gone too far," he said quietly, as if the lobby itself might overhear. I nodded. "Let's go outside," I said, gesturing toward the glass doors. "This isn't the place." The sidewalk in front of the hotel was wide, washed in white streetlight. The night wind moved through like someone had opened a large empty room. The sound of cars blended into a steady, low current. We stood near a planter, a few steps apart from the passing crowd, close enough to talk, far enough that no one cared. Ethan rubbed his palms together, then shoved them back into his pockets. "I didn't think it would turn into all this," he said, staring at a small crack in the pavement. "Why did you say that line at dinner?" I asked, straight to the point. He shrugged. "Just a joke, among friends." I waited for something else after joke, but nothing came. "I spent 2 years saving every bit I could," I said. "Trying to mend things. You know what I had to do to make that happen." "I know," he said. "But you overreacted." Everyone laughed. No one took it seriously. The wind shifted. A sports car roared by, leaving the faint smell of burnt rubber. I kept my eyes on him. "How do you think I reacted?" I asked. "You walked out of the party. Then you took the car back." "The car was still under my name," I said. "As for the rest, I don't owe an explanation." He exhaled, long and tired. "You embarrassed me." I didn't smile. "Was that another joke?" Ethan stayed silent. Music from a nearby bar pulsed in steady rhythm. In his eyes, I saw a man caught under a spotlight, searching for lines he'd forgotten. "What did you come here to say?" I asked. "I want to fix things," he said slowly. "We're family." "Family isn't an audience," I said. "Family isn't where you turn someone into a punchline." "I didn't mean it that way. Intent matters less than action. And after that, you went online?" "I just shared how I felt. By using my voice to tell your story," I said evenly. "By asking for pity." He turned his head slightly, jaw tightening. "You always make things bigger than they are." I glanced at my watch. I had a light meeting in the morning. I needed sleep. I hadn't come to Los Angeles to pick up the fragments of an old story. But since this meeting had found me, I wanted everything said plainly. "Fine," I said. "If you want to talk about fixing things, I have 3 conditions, clear, non-negotiable." He looked up. "I'm listening." "First," I said, "a direct apology. No excuses, no word but attached." Ethan swallowed. I continued. "Second, a commitment to family therapy. Regular sessions, scheduled, on time, no skipping." "Therapy?" He frowned as if touching something sticky. "Yes," I said. "Not to assign blame, but to learn how to speak without drawing blood." I paused, then gave the third. "No talk about money. Financial boundaries stay as they are. No cards, no loans, no temporary help." A bus hissed to a stop at the corner. The door opened, air released with a sigh. Ethan looked at me for a long moment. His eyes flicked between my face and the dark behind me, searching for an easier exit. "I didn't think you'd take it this seriously," he said finally. "We're family." "The closer the bond, the more serious it should be," I said. "You took it seriously enough to make me the punchline at your dinner. I'm taking it seriously now." He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, eyes down on his shoes. "What, do you want me to kneel and apologize?" "No," I said. "I want you to stand up and take responsibility, to say I was wrong, and not follow it with a defense. I told you it was a joke." "That's not an apology," I replied. "That's avoidance. And disrespect." A couple walked past us, the woman laughing softly, her perfume drifting briefly and fading. Ethan followed them with his eyes for a moment, as if letting the conversation drift away. Then, turning back, His voice was lower. "If I agree to therapy, will you just let everything go?" "There's no letting everything go," I said. "There's only starting over or ending here. If we start over, we do the work session by session, word by word. If it's just to wear the label of reconciliation to regain old benefits, I'm not part of it." He gave a half smile, half sigh. "You really have changed." I shook my head. "No, I just came back to where I belong." "Where's that?" "Where adults set boundaries." We stood a moment longer in the noise of passing traffic. I felt something that had once weighed on me finally slip off, and I had no intention of picking it up again. Ethan pulled a hand from his pocket, brushed his hair back, and met my eyes. I waited, quiet, as if watching someone decide whether to step into the water. "I'll think about it," he said. "I'm busy this week." "That's fine," I said, stepping back. "When you're ready to talk with truth, I'll listen, otherwise don't message me." "Can I?" I lifted a hand, stopping him. "No money talk." He flinched. "It's not about money, No," I repeated. "3 conditions. That's enough." We stood in silence. A police car drove by, its red and blue lights sweeping across the hotel's facade before vanishing. I saw my son's face once more in that brief flash, a 35-year-old man, worn down by many things, still trying to find the easiest path. "Then don't," I said. I turned and walked away, each step steady, not fast, not slow, just sure. The glass doors opened automatically before me, soundless. In the elevator, I caught my reflection, shoulders straight, eyes steady. Back in my room, I took off my shoes, poured a glass of water, leaned against the bed frame, and let my back rest against the mattress. Outside, the city hummed bright as a stage running 3 plays at once. I pulled the curtain halfway closed, letting a strip of darkness cut through the excess light. The city night was bright, and I didn't need another lamp. Santa Barbara moved through its 4 seasons as if guarding a secret temperature. Morning sunlight rose bright but never harsh. By afternoon, the ocean breeze spoke right on schedule. I worked remotely. My calendar squares sat neatly on the screen. Morning, risk team meetings. Noon, case reviews. Evening, personal finance classes for single women at the community center. 15 minutes walk from my apartment. Life had no fireworks, but each day closed as neatly as a sealed box. The first class had only 3 students: a restaurant waitress, a night shift nurse, and a single mother. They sat 1 seat apart, looking at the whiteboard as if it were a locked door. I introduced myself. "There are no exams here. We only need a pen and real numbers." I drew 3 columns: essential, important, can wait. Essential means what keeps us alive right now: housing, food, medicine. Important means what helps us move forward: learning skills, small savings. Can? Wait means things that are nice but not urgent. I avoided jargon. I wrote small numbers first, large ones later, as if planting seeds. By the second week, they brought friends. Slowly, more than a dozen faces began showing up regularly. Each carried a story: a credit card interest spike from a late payment, a medical bill, a relative who borrowed just for now and never returned. I passed out a worksheet with 4 boxes: income, fixed expenses, flexible spending, emergency fund. "We give every dollar a name," I said. "When money has a name, it runs less wild." I taught them how to call their banks: speak slowly, ask for your current rate, request a small reduction. If they refuse, ask what conditions qualify you for one. Write down the representative's name and the time of the call. After some tough weeks, a few came back with small victories. They lowered my rate by 0.5%. The class clapped, as if a missing puzzle piece had clicked into place. I built my own rituals to keep the days from slipping: morning walks along the beach, feet pressing deep enough into the sand to prove I existed; midday work with a timer set to rest my eyes every 45 minutes; evenings revising lessons to match my students' real situations; and before bed, 3 lines of gratitude: a smile at the checkout counter, a wave brighter than usual, a student saying, "I turned down an unnecessary purchase." Small things, lined up neatly, pushed each day safely to shore. Sometimes Ethan still texted. He always opened with blame. "You made me a joke," and ended with a request. "Just a little help, then I'll pay you back." I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to Dana with one note. Same as before. Dana answered simply, logged. I no longer startled at the sound of a message alert. That tone now reminded me of the nightly garbage truck passing by, doing its job, gone. One evening after class, I received a handwritten letter from Seattle, a cream envelope, the slanted handwriting of an old friend from the bank. I sat on the kitchen windowsill to read it. You look like someone who's just climbed out of deep water, she wrote. I saw a photo of you standing at the whiteboard, marker in hand. You looked clear. I'm glad. I folded the letter, set it beside the salt jar, and smiled to myself, realizing my body was healing in ways no numbers could measure. Sleeping deeper, eating slower, my heartbeat no longer syncing with someone else's weather. The community classes grew by word of mouth. One evening, a middle-aged woman sat silent through the session, then said softly at the end, I've never actually calculated how much I live on. We picked up our pens together. The number wasn't pretty, but it was real. Truth is where you start from, I told her. She nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. I handed her a printed card with a simple line for when relatives ask to borrow money. I can't right now. I'm focusing on paying off my required debts. Maybe another time. She read it quietly, like practicing a new language. Another night, the night shift nurse shared that she'd called her credit card company and asked for a fixed monthly repayment plan. They agreed, she said. I'm not afraid of my phone buzzing anymore. The room laughed softly, a genuine laugh, without bitterness. I stood by the desk, watching each face, and realized I'd gained something more than income, a small circle of people learning not to apologize for wanting stability. At home, I hung a blank calendar on the wall to mark the days I didn't react to the screen, the slashes stacked into a long diagonal line. On the days Ethan messaged, I only drew a faint mark in the margin, a sign I'd moved past it without stopping. I didn't tell anyone about this anymore, not even my therapist. Our sessions were for other things, how to sit still without purpose, how to let a thought pass without sorting it. Some nights, I walked home after class when the center had already gone dark. The classroom empty, desks lined up straight, the whiteboard still smudged with half-erased writing. Outside, waves hit the shore in a steady drumbeat. I sat alone, listening to the wind whistle through the doorframe, smelling the faint trace of dry erase ink. There was a fullness in my chest, not pride, not triumph, something closer to the quiet satisfaction of a math problem that finally balanced. I realized I no longer waited for a phone chime to decide how I felt. I could choose my own rises and falls, like setting an alarm clock. At home, I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen table. That night's 3 gratitudes came easily. One well-timed no, one letter from Seattle, one quiet second in a classroom. I set down the pen, closed the notebook, turned off the light. The city outside still murmured voices, cars, stories yet to end. But here, everything was enough. Forgiveness isn't a ticket back. It's a map forward. The small auditorium at the community center lit up early. Chairs were arranged in 4 straight rows, an aisle down the middle just wide enough for one person to walk slowly through. I stood beside the folding table, adjusting the clip-on microphone. The coordinator gave me a thumbs up and whispered, 5 minutes. I nodded, reached into my pocket for my water bottle. My phone lit up. An email from Ethan. A few polite lines, no apology, no mention of what had happened, as if the story could be rewritten simply by skipping over it. I closed the message, no marking it unread, no flag. The phone went dark again. I slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket. The seats filled gradually, faces I'd seen across different classes. The night shift nurse, the woman who worked at a supermarket, a recently divorced mother, a retiree still carrying her son's credit card debt. I stepped forward. The mic caught my first breath, then steadied. I'll keep this brief, I began. Boundaries in family and money. There's no perfect formula, just signs to recognize and simple sentences to use at the right time. On the whiteboard, I wrote 3 lines, spaced evenly apart. Manipulation comes in sequence. It begins with pity. Then comes blame. And finally demands. I spoke from experience, no names, no dramatic color. Pity sounds gentle. I'm exhausted, work's stressful, I just need a little time. Blame follows. You embarrass me, you overreacted. And waiting right behind, Help me out for a bit. I'll pay you back." The room grew quieter. A few pens underlined words on paper. "The process of setting boundaries," I continued, "also follows a sequence. I wrote 4 bullet points. Speak briefly. Speak clearly. Don't argue. Repeat when pushed." Then I shifted to finances. Protecting your money isn't selfish, it's survival. I drew the familiar 4-box diagram: income, fixed costs, flexible spending, emergency fund. Keep accounts separate. Don't share passwords. Don't reissue secondary cards. Record every call with financial institutions, name, time, and topic. I pointed to the corner of the board. If the technical parts get overwhelming, remember this summary. After a hard process, the thing you need most is consistency. Consistency comes from preparing your answers before you're asked. A woman in the front row, short hair, raised her hand. "What if they call me cruel?" I smiled. "You say, I'm keeping myself safe. I'm still family, just not a bank." Laughter broke out light, genuine. No one mocked anyone. I gave examples of sentences to practice. "I'm not discussing money today. If needed, I'll bring it up myself. I don't transfer funds under pressure. I decide when I'm clear-headed. I want relationships that aren't about money. If it's only about money, I decline." A middle-aged woman, eyes red, said her son had recently started a fundraising page, hinting he'd been abandoned by his mother. She straightened her back. "I don't want to become a reaction to a phone." I nodded. "You're not. Not reacting is a skill. We'll practice it." I led the room through a short exercise. Place the phone face up on the table, look upward, breathe deeply, and ask, "Who am I about to act for?" If the answer isn't for me, let the phone sit another 5 minutes. Everyone followed. Some chuckled when they realized 5 minutes felt longer than they'd thought. The coordinator signaled 5 minutes left. I asked if anyone wanted to share something before we closed. An elderly woman stood slowly, her hands trembling, but her eyes clear. "I still feel guilty saying no," she said. I stepped down one stair, met her gaze. "You're choosing to breathe before you drown. There's nothing to apologize for." She smiled, just enough for the lines on her face to soften. Others rose to speak short stories, raw, some with tears pooling, some holding hands. I didn't touch their stories, only nodded, thanking each one for speaking. When it ended, I removed my mic, returned it to the desk, gathered the stray markers from the floor. Outside, the sky had deepened to blue-gray. I walked through the hallway lined with faded posters and stepped out the front doors. The night wind brushed across me, faintly salty. The phone lit up again, another email from Ethan. "Are you doing okay?" That was all. No subject line, no greeting, no apology. I stood under the porch light for a few seconds. My hands didn't shake. I swiped left, deleted it. No reply. Not to hurt, but to end a loop I knew too well. I turned down the road leading straight to the beach. The sand was almost empty. Far away, a few fishing boats glimmered like tiny exclamation points on the horizon. Waves brushed my ankles, the cold water tightening every nerve awake. The sky turned violet, colors draining from the clouds like someone pulling a sheer curtain away. I took off my shoes, carried them in one hand, walked along the edge of the surf. Each step sank just enough, then released, returning me to level ground. I stopped, closed my eyes. The wind moved along my bare arms. The ocean's rhythm stayed, even no lines, no witnesses. I thought of my classes, the faces that still came each week, the quiet no's they'd practiced for themselves. I thought of the kitchen table at home, where I wrote 3 gratitudes every night. I thought of the letter from Seattle, the slanted handwriting that said I looked like someone who'd just climbed out of deep water. I no longer thought of Ethan as an equation to solve. I gave the night its final name, peace. I didn't need revenge. I had calm. And the rest I left to silence. The story you just heard is fictional, but every detail in it carries the breath of something deeply real, the clarity of a woman forced to choose between family and dignity. Names and circumstances have been changed to protect the identities of those who might be recognized. We tell this story not to glorify coldness, but to remind you of this. Sometimes kindness doesn't need to be bigger, it just needs to be placed right. And boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you have the right to close when someone steps too far. Margaret Holden didn't seek revenge. She simply stopped. Not out of bitterness, but because she understood that disciplined silence is the language of those who've been hurt and still choose to move forward with their spine straight. If you've ever had to choose between keeping your peace and pleasing someone else, leave a comment. And if you believe true justice isn't an explosion, but the calm breath of someone brave enough to say, "That's enough," share this video. Somewhere, someone might find the courage to stop apologizing for protecting themselves. Don't forget to subscribe because here, every story is a mirror. Not everyone who stays silent is weak. Some stay silent to reclaim their own voice. On the final screen, we'll share 2 more stories about people who stood up, cut the invisible rope called duty, and found peace in the quiet they created for themselves. I promise you won't be able to look away.